Right. I see it, but I don't have the option to record. So I think it has to be the person. Yeah.
I got it.
Somebody started. Okay.
Yeah, I started it.
Matt got it.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Wonderful. Okay, so since we are recording, this is the multi-tiered system of supports documentation packet. We are going to go over the components of the packet and just kind of have some Q&A as we go through to help answer any of the questions you guys might have. So, um, this first page here is basically just to aid you in understanding which pieces of the packet have to be completed for certain students. So you can see in, for example, section 1A, 1B, and 1C, that's going to pertain to pre-K, K8, and 912 as far as the profile sheets. So that is simply just those profile sheets, which we will go over in just a moment. Section 1D contains the Tier 1 high quality classroom observation for the administrator to complete. Section 2A, 2B, and 2C is the supplemental instruction documentation, which that's the, to me, that's kind of the meat of the packet because that's actually your plan for intervention and how you're going to progress monitor. 3A is the TST referral and meeting sheet. 3B, 3C, 3D is our Tier 3 intensive documentation. It's much similar to the Tier 2 supplemental documentation sheet in the matter of this is where you're going to record actually the deficit area and what you're going to do as far as conducting intervention and progress monitoring. All right, so then here you can see what is in the appendix, what the appendix is actually compiled of. So you have the social emotional worksheet. It provides a checklist to aid in collecting information to identify potential deficit areas. So it's a really good piece of information to be completed as part of all of that data that we look at for students. Appendix B, that's the language service plan. I don't know if Sandy wants to jump in and say anything about that, or if she just wants me to wait till we go to Appendix B. Appendix
Let's just
C.
wait.
Okay. Appendix C is our dyslexia checklist for teachers, and there's a parent piece to that. D, the sample parent notification of intervention services. E, the individual reading plan. F is that good cause exemption documentation. G is the Mississippi Early Learning Standards for pre-K. And then H is actually the the state policy. I'm sorry, my mind went blank for a second. The state board policy about the three-tier model. Okay, so recommendations for documentation. So this page is really beneficial as far as I can think about, what type of student I have, what type of student am I documenting. If it's a student who is just simply a Gen Ed student who is Tier 2, then it just basically tells me these are the required components, okay? And then the recommended data collector, those roles are really up to you guys as a school or as a district. So we recommend certain people complete certain pieces. However, we know that with due to capacity, sometimes people make some changes, and we're flexible with that as far as who is in charge of each piece. Okay. All right. So we've got students who are in Gen Ed who are Tier 3 students. Our intensive intervention for pre-K students, students who are dyslexic, English learner students. Okay, so here we are at the pre-K profile sheet. So you see basically the profile sheet is just a compilation of information on the student. It has information. Well, of course, with pre-K, it's not going to have information about retentions. However, it's got some specific data that we're collecting on pre-K students. I'm going to go ahead and kind of scroll to the K-8 because this is the one that we really talk a lot about with districts. This will have information on retentions. It will have information on, you know, if a student is absent, number of absences, current course performance, you know, if they're a special population, if this student has already received an IEP and maybe the student is receiving intervention, because we do know that MTSS is for all students. So, you know, for example, we're teaching students how to read. So we're doing what's best for the student. So even though the student might be receiving, say, special education for a reading deficit, they may still be receiving reading intervention as well to give them the best supports possible. So that's documented on here. If the student is EL, it has information on here about the Dyslexia Screener. So we'll know, you know, if the student has failed or passed. The Literacy-Based Promotion Act, universal screening scores, hearing and vision, which has to be updated every 12 months, the hearing and vision does. So basically, it's just, this is a wealth of information. Now, when we go to districts and we look at documentation packets, because sometimes districts will call and they'll say, can you come out and look at our documentation packet, make sure that we're doing everything correctly. When we open up a packet, and let's just say it's in a binder or it's in a folder, really, we like to see the profile sheet or the profile information at the beginning because it really gives you an overall picture of what's going on with the student prior to kind of jumping in there and seeing what intervention is taking place. And just to kind of give you an example, we've been to districts before where the intervention information is in the front of the binder. And so I'll just start at the front and I'm going through and I'm looking to see what's been in place as far as intervention and their progress monitoring. But as I'm looking, I don't really know what I'm looking at because I'm not sure if this student has repeated before. I'm not sure if this student is chronically absent. So, you know, it's just kind of great information to have on the front end. And so kind of back to what I was saying, sometimes I'll get to the end of the packet and then I'll see, oh, here's that data sheet. Here's that profile sheet. So it's kind of like I find out that good core knowledge on the back end. So we just say, you know, try to have it in the front. Also, some districts say, do we have to fill in every blank on the profile sheet? Well, if you have a computer, a database, for example, where you can print out certain pieces of what's on the data sheet, of the data collection sheet, the profile sheet, you can write "see attached" on the profile sheet, and then you can attach that information. For example, if I printed out, you know, my office referrals, you know, so instead of filling in, like, for example, number of office referrals on a sheet, I may attach office referrals and just say "see attached." So just make sure that you note that on there so we know this information is included if it's not documented.
Yeah, and Jada, when we were in schools, we had teachers do this first because that really helps the teacher to know.
Right.
Because a lot of times teachers will come to you as the interventionist and they'll be like, well, you know, I don't know what to do. But in fact, they haven't taken the time to really look through the cue. So this really gives that teacher who's referring the student a really good opportunity to take a good in-depth look at that student and their history, their educational history.
Exactly right.
And not only that too, Sandy, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's a good talking point too for teachers when they have conferences with parents. They have all of that cumulative information on the student profile sheet, and you can have a really good conversation about, you know, how the student have been progressing, you know, per subject area, how they're doing on their screeners. You know, when you do the hearing and vision screener, you know, this is, of course, you're going to notify them, you know, after they get, you know, complete the hearing and vision screener. But just giving them that information, you know, again, to let them know, hey, this is what's going on with your child. It's a really good talking point for teachers to have with parents as well.
Exactly, Matt. And just to kind of throw something in there with that, for example, you know, as parents, I mean, I'm a parent of 3, and we get really busy sometimes as parents. We get you know, there's so much going on. Sometimes if I were to sit down in a parent-teacher conference and kind of have a glance at a profile sheet for one of my kids, I might even notice something that, say, I've kind of overlooked, not on purpose, you know, not purposefully, but for example, you know, number of absences. Well, you know, kids can get sick and be absent, and before you know it, days have added up, and maybe you just really don't have, you know, as a parent, maybe you don't really realize the number until you see something like that in writing and you think, oh yes, wow, you know, this is something that we need to address. So yeah, that's great information. Thanks, guys. Okay, the 912 profile sheet is much similar, only it does contain information about state testing. So you'll see that it has an area to put your required state test. It also has an area to put information about repeated courses, because, you know, it's not necessarily a retention for the year, but it may be a course that has to be repeated. And then also that information is good to have about their diploma option as well, so we know, you know, which track they're on when we're looking at that. Okay, so the Tier 1 High Quality Classroom Observation is a form to be filled out by the administrator. It can be completed, you know, as the administrator goes in for their normal observation, so it doesn't have to be an added appointment to go into the classroom or an added drop-in. It can be scheduled, you know, as the administrator already has things scheduled, so that we're not just adding to. But it is just basically to see if the teacher is differentiating instruction for tier students. So, you know, we're scaffolding, or we're providing manipulatives if the child needs manipulatives. If the child has, you know, is allowed extended time, that they're actually getting their extended time. It documents whether or not the teacher has some good solid core instruction going on. You know, she's really attentive to her students, they're engaged, there's good questioning going on. And then also classroom management, that's really an important piece to me. So I am a former interventionist, and I used to go pick up my students. And so I would know, you know, when I went to the door to pick up my intervention students, I could kind of tell, you know, what was going on as far as classroom management went. And those intervention students that I had who were in the classes, who really had procedures and rules in place, who really had that setting that they needed, and they had those smooth transitions going on, you know, those are really the students who were growing leaps and bounds because of that classroom management. So that's a key piece to make sure that we keep in mind as far as, you know, our students and their growth. Let's see.
Yeah, and it's a great.
Oh, go ahead, Sandy.
I just was going to just say, you don't want to overlook that one. Sometimes we have a tendency to overlook that one and just do it right before we know we're going to go to a comprehensive, but it's really kind of triage on the front end to say, you know, it can even be a good point for the principal or the administrator, whoever's making the observations, to be able to say, I see this as a strength in the teacher, but this is where I can further support the teacher so that they can better support their students.
So this form has to be completed by an administrator.
Administrator or designee.
Or designee.
Yeah, preferably
somebody on the
principal or assistant
team.
principal.
I wouldn't have a pro teacher do it.
And because it's aligned to the teacher growth rubric, I would strongly recommend that it be completed by a person who has official capacity to observe the teacher.
Yeah,
as a
private too.
Yeah. I will also keep a record of this in the office. It doesn't necessarily have to be a part of the tier packet, but definitely have it available for monitoring purposes. But the principal definitely needs to keep documentation of that. And again, this is another good talking point where if the administrator or assistant principal, whoever's observing, see some deficit areas with the teacher, he or she can go in and work with the teacher on those particular areas. So they definitely want to have, some good conversations about improvement if there are some deficit areas on the 1D.
Right. And so just like Matt just said, and I failed to point that out, so thank you for covering that. It doesn't have to be in that packet. So if we come to monitor, like you said, we may just say, hey, can you grab those tier 1 observation forms for us? Because you may have them paper clipped and in a file folder in your office so that they're not just, in the packet for anyone to see. Because truthfully, the thing about packets, and this is when I kind of, I had been an interventionist for several years when I kind of mastered the packet thing, but mine were available to my teachers on shelves so they could actually come in if they needed to insert work samples or if they had something to complete. So, just keeping that piece out because it's kind of confidential.
Yeah, and you really only have to do one per teacher as opposed to one per student. So if you decide that you need this documentation because you're going to go through a comprehensive assessment or you're going to have a 504 meeting or something else, then you can have that copy for that particular purpose.
So would it be a good idea to just have one of these tier 1 this form for all teachers just to have? Is that what you're saying?
You could, and that way you don't have to, do it on the back end. You could do it on the front end if you choose to, kind of whatever fits your purposes. Matt, as former administrator, do you have any input on that?
Yeah. Of course, I had a observation notebook, and at the beginning of the year, I just made that a part of everyone's observation. That would be the very first observation that I would do going into the new year. After the teachers teach their procedures and routines, I want to go in and observe them on that, like the first days of school. But once they start getting into actual instruction and teaching standards, you definitely want to, make sure that that's what you're observing. And I would blanket everyone in the building, every teacher, every academic teacher in the building, because you don't know what classrooms, you may have a student who may need intensive support. So it's just a good practice just to go ahead and do one for every teacher.
All right. Okay, the Tier 2 supplemental instruction documentation, my favorite piece, because like I said earlier, it's kind of the meat. So in this left-hand column, I'm going to write the target deficit area, or it may be more than one area. So kind of depending on the students and where they're struggling, what the capacity is as far as providing intervention, you kind of make those decisions. Do we need to focus on one simple deficit area? Can we, work on more than one deficit area? For example, lower level students, we may say, well, you know what, we're just really going to hit phonological awareness and phonics, so you can write both of those things here. For an upper level student, you may say we're going to work on comprehension, and maybe you're going to work on all aspects of comprehension, all of those sub skills. So you just write in general comprehension. But if you need to drill down and be more specific, you can, in your diagnostic assessment, you might see, hey, this child, they can do sequencing of events easily. They've mastered that. So we don't need to spend time working on sequencing of events. Maybe we just need, the diagnostic might show that the child is struggling with cause and effect, or, a specific comprehension skill. So you just kind of make those decisions as a team as to which deficit area to start with, or, if you're going to do multiple. And again, this is for behavior and academics. So you could put them both on this sheet if you have enough room, if you can fit all of that information that you need to here. You could have multiple Section 2A sheets if you need to. If a Tier 2 intervention changes, you can add a 2A, I mean a Section 2A sheet. So you just kind of, make that call that you can have what you need as far as these go. Now, we've had people ask before, do we throw away the old sheet? I wouldn't suggest that we throw away the old sheet because, it's a history. It's documentation of what has happened in the past. You might take those old ones and maybe, put those in a certain place in the documentation packet, or, paperclip them together, maybe put them in one of the sheet cover sleeves, behind the newest one or something. But I would definitely keep those. This center column here describes supplemental and/or small group strategies. So I tried to be really precise here as to what we were doing, what we are actually doing during intervention time. So, am I providing additional modeling as part of my intervention? Are we utilizing some type of manipulative that the other students don't utilize? Because basically, Tier 2 is something different from Tier 1. So, it's supplemental to Tier 1, so it supports Tier 1 and it supports the Tier 1 standards, but it's going to be something that's different. So I've got to kind of tweak something or alter something or add something, give something in addition maybe. I had students who, and here's just an example, we were working on prefixes. So for this particular student, we would start out our intervention lesson by reviewing some prefix flashcards. Then my second step of intervention, because I was trying to be very explicit and systematic, might be to, read together some sentences that contain prefixes and suffixes and discuss the sentences, use context clues. And then, maybe my third piece was students would create words using certain prefixes. So, you can number them if you want to, like the steps. This is what we're doing during intervention each day, so that you're following that that system and you're being systematic each day. So we don't want to jump from, today we're going over prefix flashcards, and we're going to read some sentences containing these prefixes and discuss the meanings of the prefixes. And then tomorrow we're going to do some comprehension activity on cause and effect. We don't want to jump around like that. We need to be systematic. In this right-hand column, this is where you're going to explain how you're going to progress monitor, what you're going to progress monitor. So I may say over here that I'm going to go through my deck of flashcards and have the student identify prefixes and the meaning of each prefix. And, my goal for that student might be that he or she gets 10 out of 10 correct. So I might put that information here. I can also have more than one piece of progress monitoring. So for a younger student, because, well, I say younger student, but older students work with prefixes as well. But, I could have that piece of progress monitoring, the flashcards and the percent correct or number correct. But then I could also have like a grade level passage that the student reads for fluency, an oral reading passage in which, I'm documenting miscues and seeing what the words per minute are. So I could have both of those as progress monitoring. So then I'm kind of going to see, is this work that we're doing with prefixes, is it rolling over into and affecting that classroom reading, and are we, moving more towards grade level? I may start with a progress monitoring probe for a first grader that's a kindergarten level probe, and I may have to just kind of document, like I may use a different color ink if it's me, or a different color font, in which, I'm documenting that, we're starting out on a pre-K level probe or a kindergarten level probe. And then whenever my my student moves to the next grade level, I may change my color and write, we've moved to this grade level probe, just so that I have, all of that information. So guys, what have I missed here?
So the only thing I would say about this, and it'll be the same really for the Tier 3 supplemental documentation on this section. it's okay to change it if you get in and you start out thinking, this is what the deficit area is, and this is what we're going to work on. But once you get working with them, you realize they actually have this. It's something else. And they do have, so it's okay to change these as you discover, because you don't have to wait till that next meeting to say, he's got this. He needs to work on something else. If you discover it, change it. Just make sure you're documenting and marking that on the progress monitor, because he or she may have really high scores and then all of a sudden drop down. It's not that they were not making progress, it's that you really found the correct deficit area, and so that's what you're building up. So just make sure you mark it here and on your progress monitor sheet.
Okay.
Right.
Right there, but where it says like the details of the intervention and it says describe supplemental, but anyway, it says should be evidence-based. How do we know that these strategies are evidence-based?
So with teacher-led intervention, typically what occurs, you have an evidence-based curriculum that you guys are using. So, you may have additional activities within your teacher's guide. Some of them will have in the margin, for example, a box that will say, supplemental instruction or intervention instruction. So if it's coming from your evidence-based materials that you already have, then it's evidence-based. We know it's kind of with tier 2, it's kind of just our teacher knowledge of, we know that this has been proven to show growth. Now there are places to look up this information about these strategies. What Works Clearinghouse has like intervention programs. I don't think they necessarily just have strategies, but RTI Network, I think they have strategies, and Intervention Central, Florida. Oh my gosh, y'all got to help me here. Reading research. Yeah. I know they have strategies for supplemental instruction and intensive instruction that's been evidence-based. So you can look out there, but really at tier 2, we kind of know, that's just kind of our teacher knowledge. And then also, it's evidence-based too if the students are growing, so maybe there's not a lot of research out there on a particular skill, a particular strategy, but if your student starts to make growth on that progress monitoring, then that's kind of your evidence right there. Hey, it's working for this kid, because every kid's different. And like we kind of have a joke in the intervention office about, a lot of things are gray. We can't just say yes or no, or do this, don't do this. Because, it really depends on the kid. It really depends on what's going on with the kid. All the information on the profile sheet, what's going on at home, for example. So, we just kind of have to make those determinations based on what that kid needs.
Did we record the session that Matt and I did on interventions, and Matt really went through what Works Clearinghouse and actually how to find those strategies, those evidence-based strategies?
I think so. We will look.
I think we did.
If y'all will make a note of that for me, y'all know I can't man the thing and note take. But if y'all will make that note, we'll look to see if we can send that information. Okay. So at the bottom of the form, you just have your intervention start date, the duration, meaning the number of weeks, frequency, am I seeing this student 3 days a week, 5 days a week, every other day? If it's secondary, some secondary schools do an A-B schedule. So it may be that I have a student who, I only see on A days, or, we allow flexibility with MTSS, because we've said with your capacity, your scheduling, you have to make it fit y'all's needs and not to be. So that's where, you guys as a team will decide frequency of progress monitoring. It is recommended, and we do strongly suggest, 2 times a month for a tier 2 student, so every other week. One thing that we want to make sure is that if the student is absent on progress monitor day, that we note that, or, you know, I know when I was an interventionist, if I had kids who were absent on, I did all my progress monitoring on Fridays, I might on Monday have a minute to go grab some of my kids, and I say grab, I'm not going to grab the kid, but go get that student and do that progress monitoring. But it might be that Monday is full from bell to bell, and I don't have time to make up that progress monitoring. And if I don't, I just need to kind of document, you know, they were absent, or I might be absent. One of my kids might have been sick on Friday, and nobody got progress monitored. You know, you kind of have to make those calls as a school. I think if I were absent on Fridays, I typically did do my whole set of progress monitoring when I returned, because I didn't want to miss, you know, the whole week. But I mean, things happen. You know, you have parades, we have pep rallies, we have assemblies. So, you know, just document.
So
Right.
how long do y'all recommend as far as the duration of the intervention? Like when it says weeks, how will we know how long it should last at tier 2?
So at tier 2, I would say 8 weeks. So at week, say 4 or week 5, you know, I'm reviewing my data and deciding, you know, is this intervention working? Well, kind of like what Sandy said a few minutes ago, at that point, if we don't think it's working, we might change that intervention. So really, we could change it at 4 weeks. Now, you know, considering the fact that we only progress monitor every other week, you're really not going to have a lot of data at 4 weeks. So I'm really just kind of using this as an example. But you might decide to change it before an 8-week period. You may get to 8 weeks and you guys might say, look, this tier 2 intervention is exactly what Sandy needs to be successful. And we're going to stay right here at tier 2. We're going to keep, you know, moving and shaking and plugging along with what we're currently doing because it's successful. So just kind of have those conversations about what y'all think is working. I mean, kids can graduate on tier 2 if that's what they need, you know. But we have to make sure though that we don't keep them in tier 2 and just keep on saying, well, they're in tier 2, they're in tier 2, they're in tier 2. We have to make sure we really look at that data and dissect that data and have data to show that tier 2 is the best placement for the student.
Right, because with tier 2 and tier 3, they could be making progress, and that progress could be steady enough that it's helping them to be successful, but they could also be making progress, but it's so slow that they'll never catch up, and the gap will get wider and wider between themselves and their peers. And we have to think about our obligation to child find at the tier 2 and tier 3 level is like Jada said, is this the best thing for this student? Can we keep them in the tier process and keep working on this, and they're going to continue to grow and be successful at an appropriate rate, or are we just kind of limping along? So that's the other part of it.
Right. And so where it states here about the MDE policy and no later than 8 weeks, just remember that at that 8 weeks, you are required to have a meeting to decide what your next step is, but your next step may be to continue, or it may be to go back to tier 1. It might be to move to tier 3. You could, I mean, a comprehensive evaluation can be requested at tier 2, you know. It just depends on what's going on with the student and the data. So
yeah, I was just going to say, the short answer is it depends.
Yeah, yeah. At the bottom, you see the notification down here at the bottom. Now, it is not required that we notify a parent when a student is in tier 2. But truthfully, I mean, as interventionist, I wanted parents to know, you know, we communicated with the parent. So we may not, at tier 2, you may not have an official parent meeting to let them know that the student is in tier 2, but you know, the teacher may call on the phone that they may have, you know, correspondence in the planner, emails, but in some way we've let that parent know, hey, you know, I see need for supplemental instruction. All righty, the integrity checks. So the integrity checks are completed twice at pretty much equal intervals, you know, so you may complete one at 4 weeks and maybe one at 8 weeks. But basically, this is to make sure that the intervention is taking place as described. So it's being delivered as prescribed. I'm sorry, I said described, as prescribed for the student. So we're looking to see that it's being carried out with fidelity. So one reason this is in here, truthfully, is because we don't want to get bogged down by documentation and not work with students. You know, it's so easy sometimes to say, okay, it's my intervention time. However, I've got this documentation packet to work on. So, you know, I'm not going to provide my Tier 2 supplemental today. And really, we don't need to have that thought because truthfully, we do have to fill out documentation. We have to have documentation to show that things happen. But the heart of the issue here is we want teachers and students together working, you know, so just kind of keep that in mind as these integrity checks are completed. So one thing that Laurie always says is that if a student is absent and the integrity check is completed, but there's another student in the classroom who is on intervention, then this could really be completed for both students at the same time. So it's not that you have to see the teacher providing the intervention to that particular student, but maybe she pulled a group and, you know, Chance was absent, but she sees that the teacher's really carrying out the intervention with fidelity and integrity. She can complete it for him too and go ahead and put that in the file.
So the administrators are the ones to do the integrity checks as well as the Tier 1 sheet.
So
Yes.
I was on a team where there was just a lot of integrity checks to do. And, you know, sometimes the administrator is getting pulled away from different things. So our administrator allowed myself and the literacy coach, who was our district literacy coach and in-house literacy coach, and he and the assistant principal, we split them up because this was not for evaluation.
And that's a good point. So, you know, we ask that an administrator complete it. However, if it's someone who is appointed, I think that it would just be important to have, you know, if we have some integrity checks that show that it is not occurring as it should, you know, then I think the administrator should go in and do a kind of a backup check to make sure that, you know, we've got the correct information we need. Okay.
Okay, so so what happens if the administrator or designee goes in for the integrity check, either the first or the second, and they cannot check off everything in the box? Maybe the interventions, you know, just not happening. So then what?
So do you mean like the time of day I go in and maybe it's not intervention time, or do you mean just we haven't hit all these boxes in one visit?
We haven't hit all these boxes in one visit.
I might just write myself a note to go back in on another day and just kind of note that. So, you know, it's not, I don't want to say life or death, you know, but sometimes maybe you're not in there but a split second and the walkie might call you back to the office or something, you know. So it might be that you have to return. And so we do understand that, you know.
Okay, so so I'm looking on this integrity check. Is there somewhere to indicate like the student's name, or we're just looking at, we're not, well, how do you know? So with this integrity check, we're checking for instruction.
Yeah,
Instruction.
instruction of the intervention. So,
Okay.
you know, there's not, and you just pointed out something great that we might need to add. There's not a place to put the student's name. So what you would do is, for example, as I said a moment ago, you know, if a teacher has multiple intervention students, you may have one, and then you could even make photocopies of that one, you know, and put in each student's file, each of her intervention students' file, because you've seen her do all these things with one of her groups, you know.
Okay, so
Yeah,
where do we
and
put
sometimes I would write the kids' names in pencil on the back that she was
Gotcha.
working with. Because if she was working with 3 or 4 kids and they're all her intervention kids, then I would just put that in pencil. That way I could make a copy, but that way the other kids' names wouldn't be on the same sheet in that file, just for
So is there
confidentiality.
So what about, is there somewhere to list the teacher's name? Am I missing that? I don't see it.
Yeah. I would just put, I usually just put the teacher's name on
Okay.
it. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be anything formal.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. We probably should add that when we redo this packet.
I was just going to point out too, before we leave that form, Jada, is that that's what I did. When we went in to do the integrity check, we just made sure that one was done, and then we photocopied as needed and
Okay.
place those copies, you know, in each tier folder.
All right. So for progress monitoring, so this is the supplemental progress monitoring. You are not required to use this particular chart to graph your progress monitoring. The teacher or the interventionist can create their own chart if they want to. You know, there's Chart Dog. There's so many different ways that you can graph the results for progress monitoring. But if you do create a chart using this, or the graph using this chart, you're just going to write over here the name of the probe or the trial. So basically what your progress monitoring. The baseline, I think, is really important. Sometimes we don't include baseline because we get so busy, you know, and we think I don't have time to do that. But I think that it's really important to have that baseline prior to intervention starting. And so I would write my numbers up the side over here. So this axis would include numbers. So depending on what I'm progress monitoring, these numbers might be different. So for example, if I've got a 6th grade student who's reading 50 words a minute or something, you know, I may count by 10s here and then just like put my dot in between the numbers. So you just kind of have to kind of play with, you know, what's the best way to plot it if you're plotting it yourself. For tier 2, again, we suggest every other week, so 2 times a month. And so you see it's got your 2 spaces for that month. Now, if I change my tier 2 intervention, I might, I can still, and I know in Laurie's examples that she sent, I think she sent some like this, where she changed pen color and then wrote the change in the progress monitor probe or the instrument, and charted it on the same chart so that you could have both of them on one page. Or you may, you know, you guys decide, do you want to just create a new one when you change to a different grade level? Or if you're going from phonemic awareness to phonics, you know, you just kind of decide what fits your needs. Okay, and so we already kind of covered this piece right here, that we're going to look at this data at 4 weeks, and then we're going to look again at 8 weeks. And then we're just going to write, you know, our date that we first reviewed. If we feel like the student's making sufficient progress, And then this is for our 8-week cumulative review. But then again, remember, we call it a cumulative review. However, it may not be the end of intervention. So we would, make those notes, and we would choose our reasoning down here. Okay, this sheet is for a referral for a TST meeting. So this is really a good sheet because Sandy and I can tell you from the past that sometimes as an interventionist, you're walking down the hall and somebody's running up behind you, and Miss Brantley, I've got a student I need to talk to you about. We really need to meet on so-and-so. And, if I didn't have a notebook in my hand, or if I had a group of students and I was on my way back to my room, I might say, well, we'll get together and have a meeting on that student. I might get back to my room and start my intervention group. And, I've forgotten that piece. So this is just good documentation to have as far as the teacher fills it out and expresses why he or she wants to have the TST meeting, what is the reasoning, and then submits it. And that way we can schedule those meetings. We can add those students that need to be met on. So the summary of discussion piece here, I could never keep all of my information here because I like to give a lot of information about meetings. So sometimes I would say, see the back, and I would write down the back of the sheet if I wanted to, or I might type it and print it, again, that's kind of your call as to how you document. Some schools have actually called and asked me, hey, can I create a summary of minutes sheet, that's kind of got our mascot on it or our logo. And, it's just for us to write what was talked about and everybody signs off on it. Sure. If that fits your needs, you can always add a piece like that.
Okay, so Jada.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so right here, this is the form for if a teacher wants to do a referral.
Yes.
Okay. What about if a parent wants to do a referral?
So I would ask a parent to just put that in writing, either in an email or send a note. But, truthfully, even if a parent jots it in the planner, I really like to have my student in intervention. That works too. Make a photocopy of that page of the planner. So really, we're just about making sure you have the documentation, and not necessarily is it exactly the form, or, is it in form method, is it in a type of form, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So look, so if a teacher does this referral, are they automatically coming in on tier 2?
No. So, gosh, I had teachers that would make referrals, and then we would get in the meeting and look at the data, and maybe the student didn't need tier 2 intervention as much as maybe they just needed some differentiation at tier 1. And a good example of that is like a student with dyslexia who maybe has just some, mild dyslexia. And I think about, and I always talk about this, this is one of my own kids, and she didn't need to be in tier 2 or tier 3 because she was making A's, B's, and C's. However, it took her a long time to complete assignments. So it may be that, her teacher may get her at the beginning of the school year and say, oh my gosh, this Bailey Brantley, she really needs intervention. But as a team, we may get together and look at all that data. And then in that conversation, come to the conclusion that, hey, she really doesn't need intervention as much as can we put some type of accommodation in place that's differentiating, such as allowing her to come in the mornings and start her math test before math class, to give her that time. So you guys just kind of make that decision as a team.
Okay, one other question. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say.
Go on.
I was just going to say that's another thing that the interventionist, that was the interventionist before me in our building, she changed the way we viewed our TST meetings. And she brought in so that we could come in and discuss. So yes, we discussed our kids that were on tiered intervention and how they were progressing, but then she would ask, now, and do you have any questions about any other kids? And as a team, because it wasn't just her and I, but as a team, we would sit and talk, and they would, you know, we could give ideas back and forth of, well, try this, because like Jada said, there's some kids that you're just, you know, you've got a little teacher block, and you're just, it's not coming across, and you can't work your way out of it. So you just need to talk about it. So that's another way to think about your TST meetings, not just the time to discuss the ones who are on tiered intervention, but some others that are, you just need a different tier 1 strategy.
Okay, so so outside of teacher referrals and outside of the populated list that comes from Mtss, what about adding other students to MTSS? So is there like a procedure or a process or another group that we should be looking at if they haven't been referred by the teacher or the parent? Are there other students that we should be looking at?
So
I can tell you, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jada.
I was just going to kind of use an example from secondary. We make the suggestion that for secondary, maybe you create a spreadsheet for your 7th grade that contains columns that are labeled as far as the data that you're looking at. So you would have a column that would have, like, for example, their 6th grade state test scores, a column that might tell how many times they've repeated, a column that tells, you know, if they have some behavior issues going on, you know, just some different columns of data. And then you could take that sheet, and this is just one idea. You guys may come up with something that you love much more, but maybe have all the 7th grade teachers kind of, you know, look at their list of students and say, you know, I feel like so-and-so is struggling. Let's add so-and-so to this spreadsheet. And then, you know, it might be that once you fill in the data and you're comparing all of your 7th graders, you may have a group that kind of fall in the same areas of weakness that you say, you know, look, we've got 5 kids here who have been absent a lot. You know, school hasn't been in that long. We need to intervene there with, you know, we need to have some meetings and talk about what we can do as positive ways to get the child to school. Or, you know, you just kind of have to look at who needs the most need. And that's just one example of a way that I could say, make those decisions. Because, for example, I'm not going to get on an Mtss list, I'm not going to get a student's name if they failed the English 2 test, you know, so maybe they've done everything, you know, checked all the boxes until English 2 test, and maybe they failed the English 2 test, but that's really something I need to look at. You know, why did they fail the English 2 test? Dive deep into, you know, does this student need intervention, or did they fail the English 2 test because it's a high school kid with a new boyfriend or girlfriend and their parents are divorced, and so they're, you know, struggling a little bit with focus, and, you know, there's so many different aspects of ways that you could do it. It would all be okay. Sandy and Matt, I need y'all to chime in and help me there.
I think it's kind of covered. I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
you
sorry,
covered
go ahead, Ben.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Jada, you covered that well.
Okay, and then this is I'm on the same thing. I keep scrolling up and down. I don't even know what page I'm on sometimes. Okay, here I am on the Tier 3 intensive intervention form. Now this is, again, and I said this earlier, this is like that Tier 2 supplemental form. So in the left-hand column, I'm writing the deficit area, or it might be more than one area if I have enough room, and if that's the way that I choose to fill it out, or, you know, you guys as a team may have instructions for your teachers so that it's consistent, you know. I know some people like to give more instruction, and some people don't mind just giving that freedom of, you know, as a teacher or an interventionist, make your choice how to fill it out the best. So here you're going to write exactly the steps of what occurs during intervention, and as the intervention changes, I may add some steps. Like we said, I may have to turn it over to the back. And I got to be honest with you, I used to write wherever I could. I'd be over here in the margins writing notes, you know. I had one principal that always laughed at my office referrals because she said I would write a book. Okay, so, and then in the right-hand column is where you write down how you're going to progress monitor and kind of, you know, what do you expect this student to, where do you expect them to be? What is your aim? What is your goal for this student as far as progress monitoring? And your goal for students is going to differ also. And I've said this before. I'll go back to my prefix flashcard example. I might have a student that I know, hey, this guy, he can do 10 of 10 after we do intervention. He's got it in him. I've looked at his data. We've missed some things along the way, and we just need some supplemental instruction. So my goal for this kid is I want him to get 100% correct on my flashcard progress monitor. But then I might have a student, and we know some of these students sometimes, that I think, you know, once they get 7 of 10 correct, and we you know, worked on it, and we've changed, maybe we've changed the way that we're providing the intervention, or we've changed the time of day we progress monitor. That's another thing to keep in mind is, you know, if you're progress monitoring students right before lunch and they're hungry, you may not get the results that you really want. Right before recess and all they're doing is wanting to go outside, you know, so think about those things. But if I'm not really getting, you know, 10 of 10 correct consistently, for some particular students, I might say, well, you know, he's got 7 of 10 correct. And I think that for this particular student, 7 of 10 is considered mastery for this child. You know, again, those are team decisions. You guys, you know, would have those discussions about what you feel would be the goals.
Hey, Jada, before I forget, and I know that I have to jump off the call to get to that other meeting, but I wanted to make sure, because I know you can't see it, but Miss Williams, if you click on the chat, Lori has she has put in the link for that recording with Matt and I going through how to find those evidence-based things. So Matt went through what works clearinghouse really well about the resources that are in there, and there's another one that I did some stuff on. So I think and that helps for teachers who really don't know what to do, because a lot of times when they're struggling, you're like, okay, more of the same, that's not really working out for me, and it's not working out for him. What's something different I can do? So this, I think that'll help you.
Okay, thank you so much.
And two, Sandy made a really great point earlier when she said, you know, that you can change. You may go back to the drawing board and you may just throw up your hands and say, we got to change something. And you may change the entire intervention. You may even, like she said, find that it's a different deficit area. So I think that what I really want you guys to know is that, and I'll just give you an example. As interventionist, I can remember kind of feeling a weight on my shoulders. Like, what if I make the wrong decision as far as how to do this, or, you know, what to provide for this kid? Well, that's why it's a team decision, you know, so it's not just Jada Brantley making this decision about the student. And so, you know, we don't want anybody to feel like that, because it's doing what's best for the kids. So if we get back to the drawing board, if we come back to the next meeting and we're not seeing what we need to see, and we need to throw out that plan, it is okay to throw out that plan, you know, because you've got justification for it. You know, your team is making the decision based on reasons. You know, you're not just changing the plan just because you woke up and said, let's change that intervention plan, you know. So I feel that, be able to use that flexibility, you know, and know it's fine. Okay, so here you see that it says that, you know, policy says that we progress monitor, well, weekly for our tier 3 kids, so every week, but then we're going to have that cumulative review of our data. And again, that's like that cumulative review at tier 2. We may say, hey, this kid's, you know, going to continue tier 3, or we may say at 16 weeks, this child needs to be referred for a MET meeting. We may say this child's doing so well that we can move them back to tier 2. A child could be moved from 3 to 1 if your team makes that decision. Now, that's not really something I see very often, you know, because data really doesn't usually support that. But you guys can make those decisions, because the tiers are, they're, you know, they're fluid. We can move in and out.
So this would be at tier 2, this would be a new 16 weeks. This would not be 16 weeks that have absorbed the 8 weeks with the tier 2, right?
Right. So this, we need 16 weeks at tier 3. So maybe you're going to do, you know, a check at 5-6 weeks, then you're going to do, you know, a couple of additional checks. But with tier 3, because it is so intensive, you know, sometimes it takes a number of weeks to really get that data. But again, as you guys as a team, you know, as you meet, you may say, you know, we don't need a full 16 weeks of tier 3. We see what's going on. We have enough data to have a MET meeting to show, you know, that we need to have this child tested, or that, you know, we have enough data to show that this child's mastering everything they need to master at tier 3. Now, one thing I do want to caution you about is when I look at an intervention folder, and if I do see, for example, that a child is tier 3 and it's just mastery, 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 then I say, okay, well, we need to look back at that deficit area. Are we really intervening towards the correct deficit area? Or have we, you know, mastered a certain deficit area? Now we need to move to an additional deficit area. You know, just kind of look at that and synthesize it.
Okay. And when you say MET, what do you mean when you say MET?
So that's our, I don't want to say the wrong, it's disciplinary educational team. I'm probably saying that wrong, but it consists of a representative from special education, and then if you have an interventionist that's been working with the student, they would attend or might attend, or, you know, will attend, the administrator, the teacher. But basically you lay all the data out there, and this representative from special education will ask questions, make notes, and then at that point as a team, you guys are deciding, do we have data here that shows that there could be a disability? So the data doesn't have to say, hey, there's a disability. It may say there could be a disability, you know? And so then that MET team might say, well, we really feel like we need to do a comprehensive evaluation. And so it may then move into a testing for an IEP situation. So I have been in MET meetings before where the team decided that there wasn't enough data to move forward with testing, and they wanted me to just continue intervention. And I didn't really agree with that decision based on my progress monitoring. But the classroom teacher had some DRAs, some DRA documentation that showed that the child's reading level was growing. We had some other information, some other data. So as interventionist, even though I felt like I was not really settled in that decision, it was a majority thing, you know, everybody in the room except for me said, let's just keep moving forward like we're doing now. And then we made a plan to come back together as a team in a certain amount of weeks and look at everybody's data again, you know, because I didn't want to drop it and let it go, because to me, in my heart, I saw in my data that she wasn't growing fast enough, you know, because like we talked about that rate of growth, this particular child was going to be in 3rd grade the next year and had already repeated a year. And, you know, I'm looking at that state assessment. So I needed to see faster growth with what I was doing. But the teacher had data that said otherwise. So, you know, you document all that, and then you just make a plan to come back and look later, because in the end, it's all about that kid and helping that kid, you know?
Right. Okay.
All right. We have these integrity checks at tier 3 as well. So same as tier 1. Okay. Again, and I didn't point this out earlier, but just making sure that the parent understands the intervention plan too. I think that, you know, if I could go back to being a school interventionist, maybe I could have done a better job of discussing the intervention plan with the parent. You know, you get in these meetings and you're running through the meeting, you know, trying to give all the information. And maybe I could have said, you know, hey, we may not have time today to really dive into the intervention, but if you want to schedule another conference on another afternoon or something, that parent could come back. We could sit down. I could take out the intervention program. I could take out work samples, you know. So we want to just keep the parent informed, because sometimes I would have such a load of kids and I would have several meetings scheduled, many meetings sometimes, you know, that you kind of lose focus of really what do you need to get accomplished, you know? So always give them the opportunity to either call later, email, come back, you know. All right, progress monitoring for tier 3. This is just like what we talked about for tier 2, how you will set it up. You don't have to use this one. Many tier 3 programs, if it's a particular program, it may come with a type of progress monitoring. So, you know, again, you guys decide how you want to do this. And then you can write see attached if you are generating progress monitoring. Maybe if you're doing a computer program like Read Naturally is a computer program. Maybe I've generated a report from Read Naturally. I'm just going to say see attached and attach that report. And then again, this, you know, have we made sufficient progress? And then we make our decision down here about, you know, whether or not it was made and what our next step needs to be. This sheet is for an invitation to the TST meeting. So this goes home to the parent to invite them to the meeting. So when I was in the district, we did it several different ways, depending on my number of students. So if I had an abundance of students and we would have to have an abundance of meetings, I might say, hey, we're only going to meet with parents every other set of meetings. So say I met at 4 to 5 weeks, okay? At 4 to 5 weeks, I may not invite the parents, but I may say, I'm going to send you a copy of the meeting minutes home, or we're going to email you about the discussion. So I would let the parent know what was talked about and what was decided in case they had questions or concerns, but I may not have time to get them all in at that set of meetings. And then maybe I have meetings again at 8 weeks, and this time I'm going to invite all my parents, you know, to make sure that we see face to face, and then we have time to have those discussions. So I'm keeping them informed, but I'm also understanding that I have to protect my time with my intervention kids, you know, because I didn't want to have meetings for 3 days in a row and not see kids. So that's, again, that flexibility. What's best for you guys? You know, how do you need to schedule those? All right, the statement of confidentiality. What I used to do at the beginning of every year is go ahead and get every teacher to sign one of these, because before the year is over, pretty much every teacher is going to have somebody that was in some tier during the year, you know. So, and even at tier 1, I mean, this is just saying that we won't discuss what we discuss in the TST meetings outside of, you know, reasonable people to discuss it with, you know. We're not going to be at the grocery store discussing what we talked about with the PTO president if she's not the guardian, you know, or the parent.
So Jada, you said you had at the beginning of the year you would have all teachers to sign it. You would what would you put for the student name?
So I might do a photocopy thing. So if every teacher had signed it, and then let's just say I had a 6th grader that went into intervention, but he had 3 different teachers. I might have to make several different copies, you know, to have one for each teacher, for example. So you just kind of come up with the best way for you to efficiently get it signed. And usually we did it like at the first faculty meeting.
So everybody just signs without a student name. You explain to them why they're signing it, and then just kind of photocopy it, and I got it. And then you would have it reach the students that are referred or whatever. Okay.
Yep, and then at that time you would fill out that student name.
Okay.
And you know, really, I mean, it's just kind of the same of what we expect as far as, you know, not talking outside of, you know. Okay, so we're to the appendix now, and I don't know if you want me to go through all of these, or if there are certain pieces that you have any questions about.
No, actually, you don't have to go through these because I think for our school, we just kind of needed to know about just completing the initial paperwork. And I think once we come back together, because I see one of my team members, the chair, Ms. Clanahan, has joined. But I want to be able to access this recording so that we can have the entire team to watch it. And then I guess if we have questions about the worksheets, I guess we can just contact you or
Yeah.
Lori or somebody.
Yes,
Yeah.
you definitely can.
Mhm.
Now, one thing that I want to add is, and I thought about it just looking at this social emotional sheet. If I say that a student is disruptive in class, for example, and then we go to a MET meeting and the special education representative says, well, I see that he's not growing, his reading level is not growing, but it was said that he's disruptive in class. What data do you have to show that you are addressing that disruption? You know, so what are we doing? Because that child, he may not be paying attention to anything that's going on because he's busy being disruptive. So that's why he's not growing in his reading, you know? So we have to make sure that we cover all bases, because that has actually happened to me before, in which a teacher had filled out a profile or excuse me, a teacher narrative sheet, which is part of special education documentation. However, sometimes teachers will fill them out on the front end just because they're good information, and that's fine because that helps us to serve that student. But she had filled it out and it was in her room, and I didn't realize that it was a piece of information. And so I asked for the MET meeting, and we had the MET meeting, and she brought that out on the table, and they said, you know, asked the teacher, well, you said that this student has trouble focusing and staying on task, so what are you doing to help him focus and stay on task? And the teacher was like, well, you know, she didn't really have any data to talk about, or, you know, she couldn't really tell us any strategies she had used. So they kind of threw out my referral because we needed to go kind of back to the drawing board, you know. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Okay.
But yes, please email us. Now, if you have a question about the language service plan piece here, that's going to be Sandy. You know, she just left the call to go to another call that we had. So she'll be able to answer you about that. Pretty much, I think every other piece, I could answer you, Laurie could answer you. You could reach out to Matt, and we'll be happy to help.
Okay, Ms. Clanahan, do you have anything?
I'm just overwhelmed. I have no idea how to put this into practice. And a lot of that is we don't have the resources. We've got to find some programs. We've got to find some resources to do this.
So,
and I don't know how to, as far as right now, we're all online and there's no set intervention time and we're all online. And I don't, even if we had the programs, I don't know how to implement it because there's not a time to do that.
Okay, so so let's think about tier 2, for example. Is there a way to create breakout rooms maybe in which the teacher is meeting with a certain group of students who are getting some additional modeling or some additional, you know, maybe they're receiving something that other students aren't receiving for that tier 2 instruction. Maybe think about that. Think about maybe utilizing breakout rooms. Another thing is, because of scheduling right now with COVID, I mean, my goodness, you know, you do the best you can, of course. Some schools are actually doing something in which they say all of my tier 2 is going to take place on Wednesday. So I may only be able to do tier 2 on Wednesday because of COVID and because of, you know, virtual learning. And we're saying, if that's what you can do it, you know? So go ahead.
What are you going to do with the rest of your kids? Because we have classes the whole time and there's not an intervention time.
Okay, so you're actually providing virtual instruction, like bell to bell. You're on the
right.
Okay, Matt, help me here.
I mean, this is for tier 3 too. I mean, the teachers are tied up with their classes.
Your district and your principal are going to have to think creatively in terms of scheduling. when it comes to providing tier 1 instruction and providing tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. It may be where you have tier 2 instruction happening the last 30 minutes of the day on a particular day. But they're going to have to allot some time in you all schedule for interventions. They're just going to have to be flexible. All time cannot just be designated to tier 1, because this is, by law, we have to make sure that students are receiving that time. So I would get with the principal and see what time can be carved out for intervention time. Whether it's the first 30 minutes of a day or the last 30 minutes of a day, but you definitely, and that's one of the beautiful things about virtual learning is that, especially secondary, we've had this conversation, is that sometimes it may have to extend beyond the normal 7 to 2:30, 3 o'clock time period, just to get things done. And we understand that. We understand the challenges that districts are facing, but I would definitely start with going to the administrator and saying, hey, we need to carve out time for interventions. Don't try to figure it out yourself.
And we need programs.
Right. You're overwhelmed. Involve your administrator. I was about to say, let them help you think through that process. Yeah.
And believe it or not, that's something that Ms. Clanahan, we actually just talked about early in the week. Ms. Brooks and Ms. Dixon and I about some intervention time. So because Jada and Matt, we've had that when we were face to face, but of course when we went virtual, just trying to make everything work, we really didn't consider that, building that into the schedule. But it has come up with another situation, so we were just talking about that last week. So.
And truthfully, you're not the only district who didn't consider these things. We didn't know, and it's trial and error right now. The district that my youngest son is in actually started this month, early Wednesday dismissal, so that, they have that afternoon to provide intervention if intervention needs to be provided, or, extra planning time, for example, because of virtual. So,
I mean, honestly, if we add time, those kids that need the help are probably not going to show up.
But that's why I would suggest that that you not add any time. Look at the time that you already have and see when you all can carve out time to provide those services. Again, it may not be a full 30 minutes. It may be 20 minutes, but they're gonna have to give some and give you that time that you need to do the work that you need to do for the students. So so start there. I wouldn't add any time, but definitely request for some time throughout the week so that you can have that intervention time. Yeah.
Yeah, and so another thing that I was going to say is that there are districts who have computer programs that they're utilizing, maybe for reading, and so with their secondary students, they are assigning the students practice time on the program. So that's kind of, working at some of their intervention time. Ms. Clanahan, what do you teach?
History.
History, high school history, yeah. So, yeah, secondary is a different animal. One thing I have learned about secondary from being a secondary interventionist is you do have a lot of high school kids that would say, if you want me to do this after school time, no way. But I was surprised sometimes, some of the kids that I least expected when I had a conversation with them and said, can you give me 15 minutes on Tuesday and 15 minutes on Thursday? Because, you know, it's all for your benefit. I mean, some of them would say, yes, ma'am, you know, because they want that one-on-one or, you know, small group.
Mhm.
You know, it depends. And you know your students, you know which ones are going to want that assistance and which ones are going to buck at it a little bit, you know?
And here's another thing too. Jada and I talked about this and had conversations with other districts about vocabulary. Most secondary students, one of the biggest challenges that they have is vocabulary acquisition. So you may want to get with other content teachers and you all focus on vocabulary as a part of the tier intervention.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And which history do you teach? Is it U.S. history?
World history, geography, and Mississippi studies.
Yeah. So, I mean, in preparation for the U.S. history test, you know, I know from my kids taking it, both my older kids came home and said, Mama, that was such a reading test, you know, because you can get through it if you have those reading skills, you know. So maybe just kind of, you know, and truthfully, this sounds so ridiculous, but I promise you it is not. High school kids need to read out loud too. We get in these ruts in high school where we think read independently. And when they're struggling readers, they're constantly making those mistakes when they're reading silently and no one's helping them correct it, you know? So, you know, you might even schedule a time where, you know, you get on and they just read some of the homework passages to you and you just kind of assist them. You know, you might have several words that pop up that have a root or an affix in common. And so you could stop and say, you know, what does the prefix D mean, you know, as far as this vocabulary word, and how does that help you understand this word? And, you know, so that's something that in addition that you're not doing in tier one in the classroom. And the truth is, I wish my college child that has dyslexia, I truly wish I had made her read out loud to me in high school more, because I think that her skills, she did digress because she just wasn't practicing. I mean, it's like playing baseball. If I'm not practicing, I'm not going to grow, you know? So I hope that we've helped in some way this afternoon. I mean, we're here to help you. We want to help you be successful. As soon as we, you know, if we can even come and visit, if you need us to visit, that would be a Laurie question as far as, you know, are we allowed to, would you guys want us to come in the district or whatever, to kind of see, you know, what you put in place once you kind of make some decisions, you know, and kind of give some advice on kind of how to tweak it if you need to you know, try to improve it. But we're always wanting to help you to help the kids, because the kids, that's why we're here, you know.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
Definitely.
access this recording.
So Matt's recording, right, Matt?
Yes.
So Matt, are you going to send it out? I think we have to convert it in some way. Don't ask me any technical questions though, because I don't know. We will have to see if it needs to be converted, and then we'll send it to you or share it